My name is Catherine Austin Fitz. I'm the publisher of the Solari Report and managing director of Solari Investment Advisory Services.
And what do you think is happening economically as a result of all this?
So what is happening, I just published a huge study called The State of Our Currencies. And what I describe is the fact that for many decades the dollar has been the reserve currency. And the system is what I would describe as long in the tooth. And the central bankers are trying to bring in a new system, but it's not ready to go yet. And we're in a period of great change and uncertainty where the central bankers are trying to keep the dollar system going and accelerate. So they're trying to lengthen the dollar system, and then they're trying to accelerate bringing in the new system. And they have to bring in the new system without anybody quite realizing exactly what it is. So we've had a global reserve currency system, the dollar, and it needs to evolve and change, and it's long in the tooth. There's lots of unhappiness with the system, and the central bankers are trying to bring a new system. And to do it, they're trying to extend the old and accelerate the new. And it makes it a very chaotic thing, since much of the new is being tested and tried and prototyped, and it involves many different industries. So I describe the new system as the end of currencies. So we're not bringing in a new currency, we're essentially bringing in a new transaction system that will be all digital and essentially end currencies as we know them. So what they're trying to do involves essentially all the money on the planet. So it's big, it's complicated, it's messy, and the challenge they have is how do you market a system that if people understood it, nobody would want. And of course, the way you do that is with a healthcare crisis.
And why is a healthcare crisis good for that?
Because generally, if a few people want to control the many, the question is how can you herd all the sheep into the slaughterhouse without them realizing and resisting? So the perfect thing is invisible enemies. So we had the war on terrorism, with invisible terrorists, and then now a virus is perfect because it's invisible. You can't prove that it doesn't exist because it's invisible. So invisible enemies are always the preferred one, particularly if they scare people. If you can use fear and introduce significant fear, then people will need government to protect them from the invisible enemy. Then the second tactic, which is very effective, is divide and conquer. And so in the meantime, if you can use the media plays a very important role. If you can turn men and women against each other and black and white against each other. And one of the reasons you import a lot of immigrants into Europe is turn the general population against the immigrants, and then you need government to be in the middle. And so these are all, whether it's divide and tactic or invisible enemies, these are all ways to institute fear and get people to go along with things. And of course, the invisible virus allows you to do enormous control mechanisms. You can stop people from gathering, you can stop people from organizing, you can stop people from getting together and talking about what's going on, et cetera, et cetera. And if you digitize it with contract tracing, then you can control who's talking to whom. If you can get them to do all their work and education online, you can literally listen to everything they're saying. So you can institute extraordinary amounts of surveillance, all in the theory that we're protecting you from the invisible virus. It's very clever, and as you can see, it's working with many people, not everybody, but many people. So to me, a lot, and I don't want to underestimate the ability of the leadership to introduce pathogens that will kill people, and I don't want to suggest that people aren't getting sick, but essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to get people to buy into a solution before they see where it's ultimately going to go. Because you're talking about a transaction system that is no longer a currency, it's a control system. So it's like a credit at the company store. If every central bank comes out with a digital central bank currency, they have the ability to turn your money on and off. So if you don't behave, that's it. And of course, as we know, they want to combine this with transhumanism, which means literally, I take injections that can institute the equivalent of an operating system in my body And so I'm hooked up to the financial system literally, physically.
To step back to the beginning a little bit, to little 101.
Sure.
Is what is the actual effect of the lockdown measures?
So what you're doing is you're trying to, I used to call the Patriot Act the Concentration and Control of Cash Flow Act. And this is a very similar process. You're trying to dramatically centralize economic and political control. So let me give you an example. In the 2016 election cycle, we saw the general population support candidates who represented populism in a variety of different ways. So Bernie Sanders was a populist relative to the other candidates. Donald Trump was a populist relative to the other candidates. And literally what the sort of global capital class realized was they had a problem that could be solved by destroying the independent income of small business and sole practitioners and people who had independent forms of income. So if you're a doctor, if you're a lawyer, if you're a CPA and you have your own practice, you are generally going to support the populist candidates. And so the way to shut the populist candidates down is to shut off their income and support, which is you put Main Street out of business, and then there's nobody to finance a Bernie Sanders or a Donald Trump. There's nobody to support him.
So, I mean, do the lockdown measures appear to you to be, it's more of an economic thing than a virus mitigation plan?
So this is an economic war. And you've basically had sort of the top 1%. So since April, we've seen global billionaires increase their net worth by 27%. Now, what that says is this has been a very successful global economic war, because what you're having is this sort of global capitalist class, and I shouldn't call it capitalism because it's not. It's much more it's economic totalitarianism. What you've seen is they've been able to consolidate fantastic amounts of economic wealth, not just by deleting the income of the middle class and consolidating it into their companies, but by significantly improving the wealth and power of the largest G7 developed countries and China vis-a-vis the emerging markets. So, the countries with the most advanced technology and the access to AI and software and to the sort of digital systems, including through space, are dramatically consolidating economic power vis-a-vis the weaker nations. So we're seeing a consolidation of economic power, centralization, both into the wealthier and the more powerful nations, and the basically top 1% who control them. So I would describe what COVID-19 is the institution of controls necessary to convert the planet from democratic process to technocracy. So what we're watching is a change in control and an engineering of new control systems. So think of this as a coup d'etat. It's much more like a coup d'etat than a virus. So for 20 some years in the United States, we've had a financial coup d'etat. And we knew at the end of 1995, a decision was made to move much of the assets and money out of the country. That was part of sort of bubbling the global economy of globalization. And they knew that once they'd finished moving all those assets, that they would have to consolidate and change the fundamental system. So after the financial coup, you've stolen all the money in the pension funds, you've stolen all the money in the government, and now rather than turn and tell people, well, we stole your money, you need an excuse that will allow you to consolidate and change the fundamental system. And so you have a magic virus. And the magic virus is, we have to fundamentally change the system. And, thanks to the magic virus, there's no money in Social Security. Thanks to the magic virus, there's no money in the Treasury. And you have your perfect magic excuse.
Everything can be blamed on the virus.
Yeah, the magic virus can, it's amazing because every implication of the financial coup has been magically solved by the magic virus. It's quite, if you're a financial person and you look at the world through the mathematics of time and money, it's quite amazing that anybody believes it, but they do.
Yeah, right.
Right. It's part of joining the what C.J. Hopkins calls the Covidian cult. You join the cult and you say, oh, yeah, well, the magic virus took all the money from Social Security.
Yeah.
Magic virus caused our pension funds to, not be sufficient. Blah, 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 blah.
So, what do you think the technocracy that we're being pushed towards will look like?
So the technocracy that they're pushing towards is what is called transhumanism. So essentially what you do is you use injections to inject materials into the body that create the equivalent of an operating system. So everybody knows the idea of Microsoft causing you to download an operating system in your computer that gives Microsoft and a variety of other players a backdoor into your computer. And every month or 2 or 3, you've got to update it because they're viruses, right? It's back to the magic virus that can solve all problems. And so this is a similar system for your body. You inject materials into your body that essentially create the equivalent of an operating system and a receiver, and you can literally hook everybody up to the cloud. And that includes hooking them up in a way that their transaction system, the Bible calls it the mark of the beast, is one way people know this up. But you're basically talking about being able to digitally identify and track people in connection with their financial transactions. So it's a world of zero privacy. But more importantly, what's important to understand is if you then institute one or more central bank cryptos, you're now talking about a system where every central bank in the world can shut you off individually from transacting if they don't like the way you're behaving. So many people are familiar with the social credit system in China. It's very similar. You're basically, if you install the smart grid in their car, their community, and now literally in their body, you've got 24/7 surveillance. And if people don't do what you say and behave the way you want, they can and will shut off your money. So, and they'll also have spatial control. If they say you can't travel more than 5 miles, that's it. Because you're in a complete digital control system, and it's controlled by the central bankers through the money. We're digitizing everything, but it includes the human body as well and the human mind. So this system comes with complete control not only of your ability to transact financially, which is hooked up to your body, but very sophisticated mind control technology through the media and those cloud connections. So basically, you're talking about hooking up into the Borg, if you will, and so transhumanism and technocracy go hand in hand. Now, I would describe this as a slavery system. So we're talking about shifting out of freedom, where we have freedom to roam and freedom to say what we want, into a complete control system 24/7, including mind control. Now, the challenge before us is if the committee that runs the world, my nickname being Mr. Global, if Mr. Global wants to go to a slavery system and we want to remain a human civilization, then we have a fundamental disagreement, and that is the disagreement before us. Okay, so if you look at what's going on, we have the tech people building the clouds and the telecommunications. We have the military doing space and Operation Warp Speed. So they're putting up the satellites, okay? Then we have Big Pharma, which is making the injections that are full of these mystery ingredients and modify your DNA, and for all we know, make you infertile. And then we have the media pouring out the propaganda. And then we have the central bankers engineering the central bank crypto systems. So you have these different pillars, and it's very important when you look at what's going on day to day, particularly in the media, they're trying to keep them separate so that you can't see how they're going to come together in an integrated system, which is basically integrated into your body and your mind.
For what purpose?
To institute the slavery system. So in other words, if I am going to do everything through a smart grid, and I need to run the smart grid into your neighborhood, and then I need to run the smart grid into your body, the question is, how am I going to build it out in your neighborhood and build it out in your body without you seeing the trap? right? So that's why you try and keep these different lines separate. So if you listen to the central bankers, they try as hard as they can to stay away from these conversations. So it was interesting. I was watching an IMF presentation on cross-border payments, and the Federal Reserve Chairman, the head of the IMF, mentioned the digital global ID system, and you would the Federal Reserve Chairman almost blanched, and you could energetically feel him moving like a galaxy away. It's like, no, because there are 325 million Americans, and there are more than 325 million guns. And he doesn't want everybody to see this until the trap is thrown. It's too late.
Have we been put in a trap this year?
Yes. Right, but the door hasn't shut. So that's why the reason we're talking is because transparency can blow the game. It's interesting because in the beginning of the year, when I wrote the article Injection Fraud and said Bill Gates is trying to download an operating system in your body just the way you download it in your mind, and use virus as an excuse to have to update it, to make it work for his back door every day. 3 months later, and then Corbett did a great series on Gates, and several people came out and sort of reaffirmed this. And it was in the fall. Yahoo Finance did published a poll saying that 44% of Republicans thought Bill Gates wanted to chip them. And I said, okay, we're making progress. So, and that's exactly when Gates sort of disappeared, and they brought out Operation Warp Speed because they needed, and interestingly enough, the person they chose to run Operation Warp Speed was an expert on injectable brain-machine interface. He used to head research at GlaxoSmithKline, and he's a brain-machine interface expert.
It's a creepy resume for that job, huh?
It's a perfect resume for that job. Here's one of the most important developments that happened in 2019, in addition to the approval of the Going Direct plan by the central bankers in Jackson Hole, was the issuance by the Department of Defense of the Jedi Cloud contract to Microsoft. So you had Amazon is essentially a CIA and intelligence agency contractor. They started generating profit when they entered into major contracts with the CIA to provide the clouds not only for the CIA, but all 17 U.S. intelligence agencies through that umbrella cloud contract. So you now have Amazon running the intelligence agency's contract control this year. Now, there are other theories as why people would want complete control. So I'll give you another reason. Given the difficulty of feeding and managing a population that's getting ever larger, if you now have biotechnology that allows Mr. Global to live for 150 years, you can't keep that secret, right? If the wealthy are living for 150 years and we're not, that you can't keep that a secret. So why not downsize the population, integrate robots, use robotics for everything, and you can have a very wealthy and luxurious life without all the management headaches, right?
So the kind of breaking of society into different classes, or into an Uber class and a vast peasantry mixed with robotics?
Yes. Yeah, in other words, what's trying to happen here is Mr. Global is using technology to move to a system where between robotics, AI, and software, a few people can control the many with far less headaches and fear. You have to remember, Mr. Global is very, very afraid of the general population.
Their fear.
Yeah, they're very afraid because if you've been keeping, several times I'm told the leadership in the United States has gotten together to discuss how can we undo the secrecy. And each time they come to the conclusion it's impossible. You can't undo the secrecy because the liabilities are too enormous. So if you're the swamp and you're guilty of all the different things the swamp is guilty of, and you try and open the window on the secrecy, you run tremendous risks. Tremendous risks. So you're afraid of the general population. And the history of governance is, the general population occasionally does turn and kill the leadership. So Mr. Global is now coming to the point where...
And can you explain who's Mr. Global?
Yeah, so Mr. Global is my nickname for the committee that runs the world. The defining characteristic of life on planet Earth is our real global governance system is a mystery. And think about it, it's phenomenal we live on a planet and we don't demand to know how our governance system really works. But instead it's a secret. So, I have a lot of high-octane conjectures, Dr. Fair would say, about who and what that is, but for now we'll call it Mr. Global. So Mr. Global is now implementing robotics. That's one of the new technologies that's really starting to make an enormous difference.
So can you label that?
Okay, so here's our robot and here's our human. And of course the question for Mr. Global is, which is more efficient doing what? In other words, if I'm supposed to manage the planet and all the natural resources and harvest it to my benefit and make sure, my risk is reduced, how much do I want to use robots for and how much do I want to do humans for? Now, the brilliance of hooking everybody into the cloud with a crypto system is, with AI and software, I can have the humans teach the robots through the AI and software how to do all their jobs. And in fact, I was at the Aspen Institute in 2017, and I was having a discussion with a venture capitalist, sort of billionaire type, and he looked at me with these amazingly dead eyes, and he said, "Look, honey, I can take every company, completely automate it with software and robotics, and fire all the humans. We don't need them anymore." I've never talked to anybody who didn't understand the riot part. Because that's a very typical old game.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially in poor neighborhoods.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay, so do you want me to continue with this? So we have the Mr. Global at the top. We have the database and software systems using artificial intelligence. A very important part of this now is the satellite system that's being put up in the orbital platform. And using telecommunications and digital technology, you have the ability 24/7 to track and monitor both your humans and your robots. And the question for Mr. Global is, what's more efficient? If I can do everything with robots, then what do I do with the humans? I don't need them anymore.
So are we seeing build a kind of human farming or something?
So they would describe it as resource management. And if you look at the technocracy and the writing about technocracy, so many of us describe we're moving from whatever systems we use now to a technocracy. In a technocracy, they view, you have two different visions of the world. My vision of the world is that humans are sovereign individuals whose freedom comes by divine authority. That is what the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution all revolve around. The image of a sovereign individual as someone who is free by divine authority. In the vision of technocracy, a human is a natural resource like a oil deposit, and to be used as such. So they're not a sovereign individual, they're labor, and they are either more efficient or less efficient than a robot at different functions. In other words, what I'm saying is Mr. Global views the human race like livestock, not someone with which they share empathy, and they don't view us as the same species as them. And in fact, with a lot of the biotechnology, they figure they're going to live much longer lives than we do and live very differently than we do. So there's been one of the one of the challenges with the secrecy, as one group becomes more and more technologically advanced, they separate culturally, legally, financially from all the other groups. In other words, they have literally broken away and created a separate civilization. They don't think of themselves as part of our civilization anymore.
And who is they?
Well, that's the great mystery, and that's why I call this group Mr. Global. And my personal experiences with many different people in that group and factions, but ultimately, I can't tell you who really controls. What I will tell you is the planet is run by force. And so ultimately the question is, who is the most powerful gun? And that comes down to space. Who has the most powerful space presence, space weapons, as well as who controls the sea lanes? So traditionally, control behind the reserve currency came from control of the sea lanes. But then as we've moved into space, it's now become control of both the sea lanes and the satellite lanes. And the question is, who controls what and who has what weapons? One of the reasons. So there'll be a pecking order that relates to your freedoms to either travel or roam, or how much sort of access you have to resources. So how much money you can make. But remember, you're going into a system where if they believe they can automate everything with robotic software and AI, it's going to be that much harder for you to share in the benefits and the wealth of the system, because the central group can extract so much more. In other words, they have a one-way mirror. They can see everything you do. You can't even see who they are.
Yeah. Okay.
What's very important to understand about what is happening is that the majority of people have been, if we're talking about a transhumanist system, or, in short, a slavery system, most of us have been supporting it and financing it and building it. So when I look at all the big pharma executives, why are they building a system where their own children or grandchildren will be slaves? Why are the central banks doing it? Why did they think, there's a theory in America for many years among the sort of money classes that if I make enough money, I can get a waiver, I can get out of it, I can eat organic food, not eat the GMOs, and my grandkids, won't have to take vaccines. But if you look at who's implementing all these different activities, we're building our own slavery system, and that means we have the power to stop. In other words, we don't have to finance the companies that are doing this. We don't have to work for the companies that are doing this. And in fact, we don't even have to pay our taxes, because the government is breaking all the laws related to financial management. We have the ability to hold them accountable. So we're building the prison and we're financing the prison, and that gives us the power to stop. And that's why it's so important that we see where the system is going. There will be no exceptions.
So what is the solution?
Solution is, number one, bring transparency to what's happening, understand where the system is going, and then stop building it. If you work for Big Pharma and you're building this, stop. Go find something else to do, like build local fresh food systems so you will have food. So stop financing it. Begin the conversation of where this is going, and more importantly, where we want to go. Because we're going to have to rebuild the economy bottom up if we don't want to be highly centralized. So this comes down to, I call it coming clean. Once upon a time, I was in Washington. I was writing a check on my JP Chase private banking account. And in the meantime, I was engaged in 12 different tracks of litigation, litigating with the people who are trying to engineer the housing bubble. I was trying to stop the housing bubble from happening. And I was writing a check on my JP Chase personal banking account. I realized, why am I banking at the bank that's doing this criminality, that's destroying communities, that's doing predatory lending? And I said, I need to come clean. I need to stop banking there. So, if tomorrow everybody woke up in America and stopped banking at JP Morgan Chase and said, something, y'all are criminals, we want nothing to do with you, we're out, and went to a local credit union or community bank, it would be a revolution. It would be a total revolution. If 20 women turned to big farm executives and said, something, you're disgusting, no sex, bye, out the door, be a revolution. So we have the power to change this, but we're all going to have to come clean because almost all of us are complicit in implementing this. It's not them, it's us. The solution is for every one of us to come clean. You're either for the transhumanist slavery system or you're for a human system. But if you're for a human system, then you're going to have to find a way to make money, and engage socially in a human system and stop building a transhumanist system. Well, the first thing you have to see is you have to get a good map. In other words, you can't navigate this unless you can see the transhumanist system that is being built and who's building it. But if you're involved with, so let's go back to the pillars, okay? Don't help the military build Operation Warp Speed, okay? Don't help the tech guys figure out how to inject nanoparticles into your body and hook them up to the cloud. Don't help Big Pharma, make injections which are poisoning American children to death. Don't help Big Ag grow GMO food that is poisoning America to death. Don't help the government institute corrupt, sort of health crisis regulations that are really disaster capitalism and making the private equity guys and the billionaires rich, and on and on and on. But if you, I'll just be blunt, get the state of our currencies and read it and you'll know who's doing this. I mean, it's pretty obvious who's doing this.